The lights are still on at Marina Bay. Every night, the laser show runs on schedule. The infinity pool glitters 57 stories above the city. The Supertrees and gardens by the bay pulse with color like something out of a dream an architect had after reading too much science fiction. Everything is exactly where it was. Everything is exactly as advertised. And yet, something is deeply, catastrophically wrong. The tourists aren't coming. Not in the numbers that once made Singapore the envy of every tourism board on the planet. Not in the volumes that justified billions of dollars in investment, in the relentless, obsessive engineering of one of the most visually spectacular destinations ever constructed by human ambition. The hotel rooms sit quieter than they should. The restaurants that once had waiting lists now have open tables. The gleaming, immaculate streets of Marina Bay. Streets so clean they feel almost aggressive in their perfection, echo with a silence that no one. Singapore Tourism Board's projections ever planned for. This is the story of how a city-state that did everything right, built everything perfectly, and marketed itself flawlessly somehow ended up building a gilded cage that the world decided it no longer wanted to walk into. This is not a story about a destination falling apart. This is a story about a destination that became too perfect, too expensive, too curated, and too hollow. And how that combination is quietly dismantling one of the most sophisticated tourism economies ever engineered. And if you think this is just about Singapore, you are not paying close enough attention. To understand what is happening at Marina Bay right now, you have to understand what Marina Bay was supposed to be, not what it is. Because the gap between those two things is where this entire collapse lives. In the early 2000s, Singapore's leadership made a decision that was, by any reasonable measure, audacious to the point of recklessness. The country had built itself into a formidable financial and logistics hub. It was clean, stable, efficient, and safe. But it was also, by the admission of its own government, considered boring. A stopover city. A place you flew through on your way to Bangkok or Bali. A city of rules and fines and ruthless competence that somehow failed to ignite the imagination. So they decided to build an imagination. The Marina Bay Sands Integrated Resort, which opened in 2010, cost approximately $8 billion, for a single property. A property that included 3 hotel towers topped by a sky park the length of 3.5 football fields, a casino, a convention center, a museum, a shopping mall, and an infinity pool that has since become one of the most photographed locations on Earth. The project was not just a hotel. It was a statement. It was Singapore telling the world. We are not a stopover anymore. We are the destination. And for a while, a genuinely spectacular, statistically impressive while, it worked. Tourism arrivals into Singapore climbed steadily. By 2019, the country welcomed approximately 19 million international visitors. Tourism receipts hit around 27 billion Singapore dollars. Marina Bay became shorthand for aspirational travel. The infinity pool photograph became a cultural artifact. Travel magazines put it on covers. Influencers built entire careers around a single shot from that rooftop. Singapore had engineered desire. And desire had delivered. Then the pandemic hit, and everything stopped, as it stopped everywhere. But here is where Singapore's story diverges from the standard post-pandemic tourism recovery narrative. Because when the world reopened, Singapore did not just recover. In the short term, it seemed to surge. Visitor arrivals climbed back toward pre-pandemic levels. The city hosted the Formula One Grand Prix again. Major concerts returned. The government announced new attractions, new investments, new phases of Marina Bay's expansion. Everything looked like a comeback. But beneath the surface of those aggregate numbers, something structural was shifting. Something that the glossy press releases and the tourism board's quarterly reports were not quite capturing. Something that was showing up instead in traveler forums, in hotel review scores, in social media comment sections, and most devastatingly, in the personal financial calculations of the very tourists Singapore had spent decades trying to attract. The world had changed around Singapore. And Singapore, for all its legendary adaptability, had not yet fully reckoned with what that change meant. Let's talk about money. Because in the end, this story is fundamentally about money. About the brutal arithmetic of travel decisions in an era when tourists have more options, more information, and more price sensitivity than at any previous point in history. Singapore is expensive. This is not controversial. It is simply a fact acknowledged by the government, by residents, by every travel publication that covers Southeast Asia. But the degree of that expense has reached a level that is actively deterring the middle-class international tourist, the backbone of sustainable tourism economies everywhere. A standard room at Marina Bay Sands in 2024 and into 2025 regularly listed between 600 and 900 Singapore dollars per night, roughly $450 to nearly $700 for a single night. Not a suite. A standard room. In a city surrounded by destinations offering comparable or superior natural beauty at a fraction of the cost. For the price of 3 nights at Marina Bay Sands, a traveler can spend an entire week in Bali, including flights from most Asian cities. Private villa, meals, spa treatments, and cultural experiences that feel rooted in something ancient and irreplaceable. For the price of a week in Singapore, a family can spend 2 weeks in Thailand, moving between Bangkok, Chiang Mai, and the islands. This comparison is not new. What is new is how aggressively and how widely it is being made. Because today, those calculations don't stay private. They spread, instantly. Across Reddit, TikTok, YouTube, and global travel communities. And increasingly, they are pointing away from Singapore. What travelers are reacting to isn't just cost. It's something harder to quantify, and more dangerous. The word that appears again and again in reviews, in comment sections, in travel discussions is this. Sterile. Not boring. Not ugly. Not inconvenient. Sterile. Travelers today are not just buying destinations. They are buying experiences. Texture, imperfection, unpredictability, the sense of stepping into something real. And Marina Bay, for all its brilliance, struggles to provide that. It wasn't discovered. It was engineered. Built from reclaimed land, architectural ambition, and master planning. A monument to human precision, but not to organic history. The infinity pool is extraordinary. But once you've seen it, once you've taken the photo, what comes next? What brings you back? That question is where the real problem begins. Because adding more spectacle does not solve it. It deepens it. You cannot manufacture authenticity by layering more curated experiences on top of each other. Meanwhile, other destinations are offering something Singapore cannot easily replicate. Japan, for example, saw a massive tourism surge, driven not just by affordability, but by depth. Culture. History. A sense of continuity. Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. All competing, all evolving, all offering stronger value propositions for travelers seeking both affordability and authenticity. Singapore's advantages, safety, cleanliness, efficiency, are real. But they are no longer enough. Because safety is not an experience. Cleanliness is not a story. Efficiency is not a memory. And that is the uncomfortable truth at the center of this. Singapore built one of the most technically perfect tourism ecosystems on Earth. But in doing so, it may have smoothed away the very friction that makes travel meaningful. And now, it faces a question that no amount of infrastructure spending can easily answer. Why come here, and more importantly, why stay? Because right now, the answer for many travelers is simple. Come for 2 or 3 days. Then go somewhere else. And that, more than empty hotel rooms, more than fluctuating occupancy rates, more than delayed expansions, is the real signal. Singapore is drifting back toward being a stopover. The very thing it spent billions trying to escape. The lights are still on at Marina Bay. But whether the world still feels compelled to come and see them. That is a question with no easy answer anymore.